Good morning and welcome to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rodecap with you on this first Sunday in April, which, what in the world? Am I getting old? Maybe I am. Maybe time just flies when you're having fun, but I can't believe college basketball season is almost over, and I also can't believe that Kelvin Sampson will be coaching for a national championship on Monday night. That was a wild night. Last night in San Antonio, Texas, at the Alamo Dome, where apparently the only purpose of the Alamo Dome is sometimes to host the Final Four and UTSA football, but it's really good at least one of those things. I'll admit, I don't watch a ton of UTSA football. But last night, we were treated to two thrillers, Florida taking down Auburn by 6, and then what in the world happened to Duke? What in the world happened to the Blue Devils? They were up 14 with 12 minutes left in regulation. They were up 6 with about 30 seconds left. Yet somehow, Kelvin Sampson's Houston Cougars came back and won 70-67. And I think the Indiana basketball experience is one that is not for the faint-hearted. That's for sure. Kelvin Sampson getting dismissed, of course, all those years ago. Now, a lot of what he did, like making phone calls to recruits, yada, 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 is stuff that you would get fired if you didn't do now. But he was fired, and Indiana, of course, imposed punishments upon itself. And then now Sampson is coaching for a national championship against Todd Golden on Monday. So that's funny. Well, it's funny in a cruel irony kind of way. But I do think it's funny that a lot of people were complaining, myself included. I was among these folks talking about how we needed some Cinderellas, to make it to the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, and the fact that we didn't means that the tournament is disappointing. Maybe some of the early round games, yeah, but when you have all 4 1 seeds make it to the Final Four, you know that you're in for a treat. Just in terms of the quality of basketball that's played. And, you see it on the women's side a lot more because the women's side tends to be way more chalky year over year than the men's side is. Then again, this year, the women's side actually had a 2 seed in the Final Four. But, yeah, I think once you get to the Final Four, sure, there might be a lot of blowouts along the way. And if you're a fan of one of the 4-1 seeds, you're thinking, I'm not going to complain about any blowouts. But I think once we get to the Final Four, we're treated to some fantastic basketball, some fantastic games, and I honestly, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with having 4-1 seeds in the Final Four if it means that we get 2 very different teams in the national championship game. I do hope that one day, sooner rather than later, for the sake of me caring more about college basketball, I think that it would be nice to have Indiana as part of, goodness gracious, a Final Four team. Now, the Hoosiers, of course, haven't made a Final Four since 2002, and that was a really long time ago. So I would like for that to change selfishly sooner rather than later. Indiana men's basketball, though, has been a little bit busy, I think, in the transfer portal. Not as busy as a lot of people would like. But the Hoosiers have done a little bit in the way of recruiting. Of course, Connor Enright coming over from DePaul and Tucker DeVries in the least shocking move ever following his dad over from West Virginia. There are obviously a lot of holes to fill. And I don't think Indiana can trot out 5 Dallas Jameses, plural, Dallas Jameses, once the season begins. I also don't think that, it seems like Luke Goody not getting his waiver. It seems like that's kind of concerning. It's been a little bit at this point. I keep comparing Goody's situation to Xavier Johnson, of course, because Johnson got a medical waiver from the NCAA, and he pursued that waiver beginning in early March. And then he received the waiver in late April 2023. So there was about a 2-month gap between when Johnson announced that when he was out for the season, and that he would pursue the medical waiver. So there's still, I'd say, about a 3-week window where if Luke Goody doesn't get the waiver, it's not the end of the world. But if he doesn't have the waiver by May, then I think you start to be a little bit concerned about whether or not Luke Goody will actually be able to return. Because you think about, guys who actually said they wanted to come back. Luke Goody is the only one of the returners, and he, of course, in his sophomore season only played 10 games. So I do think it is a very comparable situation to Xavier Johnson, which is why I'm hopeful that Goody will be able to pursue his waiver and return to Indiana. Because if he does not return to Indiana, then the Hoosiers will be left with one returning scholarship player from last year, and that's Dallas James. And Dallas James did not play last year. Nothing wrong with the team looking very different. I think it's much needed, given the futility, especially last year, and the way I've talked about it on this show before, about all the blowout losses that Indiana experienced last year. And then on the other side, all the ugly home losses, all the close losses, all the winnable games that slipped away, on top of the road losses in places like Nebraska and Iowa, games which were never close. So I'm okay. I'm okay with a full roster shakeup. I'm okay with everything changing, and obviously that includes all the assistant coaches. Even the strength and conditioning coach, Cliff Marshall, is gone. It's a fresh start, and I think that's a good thing. Now, obviously, Darren DeVries was not a big name in this coaching cycle, but I think that it's okay that Indiana went with somebody who maybe wasn't on the radar. Obviously, we'll just have to wait and see how that all shakes out. So as we now shift to IU football, of course, spring practice is underway. It's disappointing that the press conferences take place on Tuesday and Thursday mornings because I have class, and so I can't go, and that's kind of annoying. Curt Cignetti speaking to the media on April Fool's Day, which, of course, was after the last show. So we've got a lot to talk about with respect to spring practice and an early injury, which is unfortunate. Tyler Morris, the Michigan transfer wide receiver, was supposed to be, I believe, the starting slot receiver, but he suffered a non-contact knee injury and will miss the season. That is always disappointing. Indiana was able to stay very healthy, I think, last year, with the exception of one of the linemen whose name I forget. I think it was Drew Evans, who tore his Achilles before the Michigan game. But outside of that, Indiana stayed very healthy last year. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but Curtis Rourke was playing, of course, on a torn ACL, which is why it makes total sense that he looked like he was running in slow motion all the time. But Indiana was able to stay healthy. So for Tyler Morris to get hurt in spring practice, obviously it's just part of football, but it's still disappointing because he was one of the higher impact transfers that Curt Cignetti brought in, looking to make a difference. And unfortunately for him and for the program, that is not going to happen. But Cignetti says that he thinks he sees progress being made, 6 or 7 practices in, so that's obviously a good thing. And with him, it's always he's never gonna sugarcoat. He's gonna be very honest, I think. He says the defensive line has been up and down in spring practice. Obviously, the key returner in that group, Mikhail Kamara, who is going to be, he was a game record last year, but I think even more so this year. I think you're going to see teams game planning on the offensive line side of things specifically to stop him. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets double teamed a lot, Mikhail Kamara, for Indiana football. I'm also excited to see what the offensive line looks like this year. It's going to be very cool to see Pat Coogan, who came over from Notre Dame, Zen Michalski coming over from Ohio State, and Khalil Benson even coming back to Indiana after having played at Colorado. That's going to be interesting, although Cignetti said that Evans, of course, coming off the Achilles, and Khalil Benson not practicing right now. They'll be back in the fall. And I really, really am excited to see what Fernando Mendoza, the Cal transfer quarterback, can do behind a good offensive line, because Indiana's offensive line, with the exception of Ohio State and maybe a little bit against Michigan, was not very good. Or excuse me, outside of those games where the offensive line was not very good, Indiana's offensive line was solid, was very solid. And so if Mendoza actually has time to read the field and make decisions, I think he could be a very, very good quarterback. And I think he could be better than Curtis Rourke. One, assuming that he's not playing on a torn ACL, and two, because if he's not playing on a torn ACL, he can run a little bit. So I am stoked for August. It cannot get here fast enough. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Becker and IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. We were talking at the top of the show about Kelvin Sampson and his path from Indiana to getting banned from coaching college basketball, now to leading Houston to the national championship game. But first, it's always a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to iucu.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. IU Credit Union, iucu.org. With Kelvin Sampson and what happened with him, of course, at Indiana, he ran into a lot of trouble. And it's difficult because you can read about it and you can talk about it. But let's see. Indiana, he resigned from his position in February of 2008, which is right about the time that I gained consciousness as, what would I have been, 4 years old at the time, as a 4-year-old. So I would be lying if I said I remembered Kelvin Sampson resigning from Indiana. I don't. And I'd be the first to tell you that I don't. But Sampson had already run into trouble when he was at Oklahoma in 2006. Between 2000 and 2004. So this is well before I became a conscious being. Of course, that it was discovered that Sampson and his staff both made over 500 impermissible phone calls to recruits over a 5-year stretch. So averaging about 115 impermissible phone calls per year. That's efficient. That's about one every 3 days. So those are pretty impressive numbers. But Sampson getting caught up with that, definitely, I think, should have tipped some people off, but whether or not it did, I don't know. I was not in the room because, again, I was barely a conscious being when this happened. And then in his second season at IU, of course, Sampson gets caught up because he had taken part in numerous conference calls with recruits, and there were already sanctions placed on him by the NCAA, but he violated those sanctions and then lied to Indiana and the NCAA about making those phone calls. Got charged with 5 NCAA rule violations and then resigned in late February of 2008. Indiana, of course, then imposed punishments upon itself. And basically the program was completely derailed for a period of a few years. So, that wasn't great. That wasn't great. The NCAA found that Sampson made over 100 calls to recruits, impermissible phone calls, and Sampson resigned from his position. Worked in the NBA for a little bit, and then, of course, what's happening at Houston now. I mean, I still think about that baseline out of bounds play that allowed Houston to beat Purdue. That was incredible stuff. And I'm just thinking, man, making phone calls to recruits, it seems like that's something that now might be legal. just might be legal. That among a whole host of other things, which I feel like the only rule in college athletics right now, the only rule is that there are no rules. And that is something that absolutely, one way or another, something's going to snap, something's going to break. It's just a question of when. It's a question of when. I don't know if the NCAA is even going to be the governing body of college basketball. Not just of college basketball, but of college sports in a few years. You've got guys in the transfer portal now getting $3 million to play guaranteed to play 31 games. They're making a ton of money on a per-game basis, and they haven't even produced yet. We talked about it a couple weeks ago with Steve Alford at Nevada during the Mountain West tournament, talking about how basically it's a bad life lesson for these players with NIL. They get the money before they ever produce, and that's not the way things work in the real world. Alford said, this I guess would have been about a month ago now, Alford said, you should have to produce and then you get paid, because otherwise what are we teaching these players? That you get paid just for doing nothing? Because that's the reality right now. And these teams engaging in bidding wars for the top transfers, it's something that it's just not sustainable. It cannot be sustainable. It absolutely cannot be sustainable. You see programs like New Mexico lose leading scorers in back-to-back years. This year with Donovan Dent, he reportedly got $2 million to transfer from New Mexico to UCLA. And if you're a smaller program like New Mexico that doesn't have that kind of cash base, are you just supposed to want to sit by and let your best players walk? I really think it's something that something's going to break. Something's going to break, and if it hasn't happened already, college sports as we know it will be dead. But again, just going back to Kelvin Sampson, it's so cruelly ironic that while Indiana now is struggling just to even make the NCAA tournament on a consistent basis, and that's been the case for a while, but while Indiana's struggling with that, Kelvin Sampson is busy, drawing up crazy baseline out of bounds plays and staging these improbable comebacks because Houston's defensive game plan is basically just to beat their opponents into the ground with hammers. And I mean, holding Duke to, one field goal in the final 10 minutes. Very impressive. Very impressive stuff. And it's, I honestly, I was thinking, and I know I'm going to sound like LeBron James talking to an interviewer about how, I had a feeling this was going to happen. But Cooper Flagg missing the game-winning shot, let's be honest, he's still a freshman. I know he's an uber-talented superstar freshman, but still a freshman. And I trust players who are more experienced before I trust Cooper Flagg in that kind of situation. On the other side, you have Auburn losing to Florida, 79-73. Of course, one of the stars probably the star of the tournament, Walter Clayton Jr., 34 points last night. Goodness gracious. But Florida's not a team that I wouldn't say the word guilty. Florida's not a team that just went into the portal and indiscriminately spent money to build its roster. So they get a pass from me when it comes to throwing bags of cash at recruits, because that's not what Florida did. Florida, I think, used a more analytical approach. They didn't break the bank as much as other schools did. That doesn't mean they didn't spend money, but they didn't just throw money at a wall and hope things would stick like Indiana did. And it goes to show that you can have the kind of NIL base that Indiana has. You need that to have a chance at succeeding, but it does not guarantee success. And I think that's an important distinction to make. That just because you have the money, just because you spend the money, doesn't automatically make you a great program. So I think that's something Indiana needs to be mindful of as it builds its roster through the portal here over the next couple of weeks. And I also, there's the whole thing about how the transfer portal is open during the NCAA tournament. That's something that I think needs to change. I don't understand how it makes sense to have the portal open during the NCAA tournament, because it's an inherent disadvantage for coaches who are actually more successful and go deeper into the tournament. They have less time, and they are able to focus less of their energy on recruiting in the portal. And if you're, say, maybe Rick Pitino was playing 4D chess all along. I mean, he said very openly that St. John's does not recruit high school players because that's just not the way that they want to do things. They recruit through the portal. They recruit more experienced players. So maybe Pitino losing to Arkansas was actually four-dimensional chess. So that way St. John's could spend more time recruiting in the transfer portal. I don't know. That's probably completely false. But maybe Pitino was just messing with us all along. I don't know. I think that's something to think about. But I also do think, again, it's not just the portal. It's not just NIL. The whole state of college sports is so fundamentally broken now. And with rev share coming down, and yes, there may be some new NIL rules that hit in conjunction with that. But I do think that at some point, again, if it hasn't happened already, something is going to break. And the model of college sports that we've become accustomed to is going to die, if it hasn't died already. You think about the premise of the student athlete. It's funny because Ja'Kai Newton, who was with Indiana basketball for 2 years, didn't really ever play. I think he scored 6 points in 4 games this year, was injured a lot, which obviously you never want to see. But Ja'Kai Newton just committed to Georgia State in the transfer portal, and hopefully he's able to stay healthy and have success there, and I wish him the best. He's in one of my classes, and in this class we have a presentation on Tuesday morning, and I saw that he committed to Georgia State, and my first thought wasn't, oh, good for him. My first thought was, oh, does that mean he's not going to be in class when we present on Tuesday? I don't know. Because he and others have not been in this class really since day one, which, of course, day one was right in the middle of basketball season. I get that. But it's not like Indiana's playing deep in March here. Basketball season's been over for Indiana for about a month now. Maybe 3 or 4 weeks, I guess, with the Big Ten tournament. But they haven't been busy as far as playing postseason basketball is concerned. Yet I haven't seen them in class. And I think maybe I'm completely missing the mark here, and I might be because I'm not an elite college athlete, right? Shocker. But the student athlete, I think, is just completely burnt toast, right? Especially if you're in the Big Ten in a sport that's not football, where you travel, say, on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and you play on Friday or Saturday, and then you come home and you repeat the cycle for 12 weeks. If you're in a sport like basketball, playing 31 games, or in a sport like baseball, playing 56 regular season games or thereabouts, depending on where you are, you really never go to class during the season. So if you're going to call them student athletes, the NCAA, I'm talking to you here, if you're going to call them student athletes, then why is it that they can maintain their eligibility even though it's, at least to me, it seems like there's no work going on in the classroom? If, say, we use this group project as an example, everybody's supposed to be graded equally, but why are the rules allowed to be different for the student athletes, right? If they're taking the same classes as everybody else, they're supposed to be doing the same work as everybody else to have a chance at the same grades as everybody else. Why are they allowed to just never go to class? I don't know. Maybe I'm completely missing the mark here. Maybe there's a lot that I don't know, and I'm sure there is a lot that I don't know. And I know that being a student athlete, again, I use that term with air quotes, being a college athlete is a full-time job. But I think at some point we need to kind of take the veil off and just stop lying to ourselves about the premise of the student athlete. I think it's still a thing in football, like I said. But as far as basketball and baseball are concerned especially, the premise of the student athlete is dead. Let's just start calling it, it's a developmental league for the pro ranks, especially with basketball, right? It's where you go if you want to have a chance at the pros, and I think it's fine if we acknowledge that. I just think that we need to stop lying to ourselves about it. That's all. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. I saw something the other day about women's college basketball and how UCLA and USC blew up the Pac-12 just to get smoked by UConn. And I thought it was kind of funny. South Carolina and UConn will play for the Women's National Championship this afternoon. That is going to be really fun. That is going to be really fun stuff. It's on ABC. Coverage, I think, begins at 2:30. that is going to be a really, really fun game. We had 2 close games on the men's side in the Final Four last night. On Friday night, we had 2, Texas, South Carolina was actually pretty close in the first half. Texas got off to a hot start, and then South Carolina, Dawn Staley decided they'd seen enough of that and ran away 174-57. And then on the women's, or on the other side, UConn, UCLA, UConn just brought the hammer down on the Bruins. A classic Big Ten team, of course, the UCLA Bruins. When you think Big Ten, you think Southern California. The three-headed monster, Sarah Strong, AZ Fudd, Paige Beckers, 22, 19, and 16 points, respectively. I think that's pretty impressive. I'm not a rocket scientist or anything. But I think that's pretty good. Winning by 34 points in a Final Four game, yeah, that'll work. Nice to see the Big Ten represented in the Final Four again, though. Obviously with Iowa the last couple of years, and then now UCLA this year. Still, I know it's been almost 2 years since this whole circus began, but goodness gracious, it's just kind of weird. So we're in for a very exciting matchup today. South Carolina and UConn, 3 o'clock on ABC for the Women's National Championship. It's going to be kind of interesting if Indiana women's basketball ends up losing to the national champion 2 years in a row in the NCAA tournament. After South Carolina knocked Indiana out this year, Dawn Staley was talking about how part of having success in March is just getting lucky. And I think it's kind of a cool, I don't know if humble brag is the right word for it, but it's a cool kind of flex when, a reporter asks you, you guys have beaten Indiana the last couple of years. What's it going to take for them to kind of, not going to say get over the hump, but take the next step? And she says, Terry Morin's got the talent. She has got the coaches around her. She's very good at her job. I think sometimes you just got to get lucky. Translation, you need to stop running into South Carolina. You need to stop facing South Carolina in South Carolina, because that is not a recipe for success for anyone in the country, let alone Indiana in what was seen by everyone as a down year. But when you're Terry Morin and you've won 20 games for 10 seasons in a row, your definition of a down year may be different than other people's definition of a down year. As for which team I think is going to win today, I honestly do not know. I think it would be really cool to see Paige Beckers go out with a championship, considering all the adversity she's faced in her college career. A couple really bad injuries that kept her off the floor, battled back, and is playing, not just her, but the rest of UConn as well, playing some of their best basketball at the right time, which sounds cliche, and it's true for obviously South Carolina as well, but this is going to be a really exciting matchup, and I will admit that I will probably be watching it on my laptop while Indiana baseball plays its series opener against Michigan State today at 1, because the weather in Bloomington and in much of the Midwest, of course, has been putrid this weekend, and really this week. I've heard more tornado sirens in the last 5 days here in Bloomington than I have in the entire 3 years I've been here prior to the last 5 days. So Indiana baseball opening its series against Michigan State today, and then the two teams will play a doubleheader tomorrow, beginning at noon on Monday, and then game 2 of that doubleheader to follow at about 4 p.m. So if you're in class tomorrow and you don't want to focus because, I don't know, you don't want to focus, watch IU baseball. It'll be on Big Ten Plus, and if you're on campus, you get access to it for free. This is a massive series for Indiana baseball. Not that there's ever a series that isn't important, but this one is more important than the rest. Just because of where Indiana stands in its season right now. Last time out, Indiana played Louisville. Louisville ranked number 18 in the country at the time. This game was on Big Ten Network Tuesday night. You think back a couple years, Indiana upset number 12 Louisville on ESPNU, and that kind of brought Indiana into the national spotlight and kickstarted its charge towards 40 wins. So you were thinking maybe, okay, this could be an opportunity for Indiana to do something similar this time around. But no. Indiana was up 4-1 late in that game. Actually, it's 4-2 entering the eighth. It was 4-2 with 2 outs in the eighth. But Indiana blew that lead and lost 6-4. Second consecutive late lead blown by Indiana. Last Saturday, of course, Indiana was up 12-3 on USC in the fifth and blew that game and lost 13-12. So Indiana now, having not played since Tuesday, you would think everybody on the pitching staff is probably good to go, because usually on Sunday you're kind of scrounging for table scraps, but that's not the case when you haven't played since Tuesday. So obviously Michigan State's Friday starter, Joseph Jerwa, the best pitcher in the conference, 5-0 with a 1.27 ERA, one of the best in the NCAA in strikeout rate, hits per 9, allowing base runners. He's one of the best across the board. I think that influences how Indiana pitches this game today. Jerwa is going to be as tough as anybody Indiana's seen all year. So I don't think that you throw your number one arm, whether that's Ryan Kraft, whether that's Ben Grable, whether that's Cole Gilly. I don't think you use those guys today unless you want to risk wasting them against a guy who is most likely going to shut down your lineup, especially on a very cold day like it is today. I think that's going to influence the way Indiana pitches this. But Indiana just one game above 500, 6-6 in the Big Ten, having blown each of its last 2 games on top of a handful of games early in the season that the Hoosiers had a very, very good chance to win. This is a series that Indiana absolutely has to have, because if Indiana does not win this series, then they'll be below 500 in early April. And at that point, you are seriously running out of time to make a run at the NCAA tournament. We're over halfway through the season. This team had aspirations of hosting a regional, and now it's struggling just to tread water. So I would really, really like to see Indiana play complete baseball in all 3 phases of the game at the same time. I don't think that's too much to ask. The offense has not scored after the 4th inning in each of the last 2 games. Indiana's been outscored somewhere in the neighborhood of 13-0 in the final 4 innings, or excuse me, in the final 5 innings of each of the last 2 games combined. That is not a recipe for success. You cannot go to sleep at the plate for the final 5 innings of back-to-back games and expect your pitching staff to hold serve, because Indiana's pitching staff has shown that it cannot hold serve. Now, I know 12 runs should be enough to win a college baseball game, but this is college baseball we're talking about, where the only constant is chaos. So Indiana needs this series against Michigan State. If the Hoosiers do not win this series against Michigan State, then they will have gone below 500 at home over this big stretch of 16 out of 19 games at home, beginning with Ohio State on March 14th. That was almost a month ago. Indiana swept Ohio State, so that's kind of what's keeping the Hoosiers above water right now. But you've got to take advantage of the home opportunities that you have, and that's where Indiana was so successful. We mentioned they won 40 games 2 years ago. 26-4 at home. 3 of those losses came in the same weekend, and the other loss came to an MLB prospect who has since been drafted by the Colorado Rockies. You're okay losing those games, because that Maryland team that swept Indiana was led by Matt Shaw, who is now the starting third baseman for the Chicago Cubs. So sometimes you just run into a brick wall, and it happens to be Matt Shaw. That's fine. That happens. We get it. Indiana was so dominant at home, it felt like every game I covered, the Hoosiers won. That's just not been the case this year. You've got to defend your home turf. And yes, Bart Kaufman Field is turf, and it needs to be replaced. The turf is very old, yada, yada, yada. But Indiana has struggled a lot, and suffice it to say, time is running out, and it's running out very fast. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. We were talking before the break about how important this series coming up is for Indiana baseball. It's not every week or ever that I can recall that you open a series on Sunday and finish it with a doubleheader on Monday, but that's what's happening for Indiana baseball today. At a crucial juncture in its season, Indiana's offense is one of the best, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. The Hoosiers have a pair of players on the Golden Spikes midseason watch list, which is the award given to the top amateur baseball player in the country, or in other words, the nation's top college baseball player. Those players are Devin Taylor and Corbin Dickerson. both outfielders. Devin Taylor, certainly a first-round pick. Corbin Dickerson playing like a first-round pick. Don't know if the scouts will evaluate him that way, but he has been one of the nation's biggest breakout stars this year in college baseball. Well, what does Indiana have to show for it? A 15-14 record? Just off the top of my head, 3, 4, 5 winnable games, all lost in excruciating fashion. Let's say Indiana wins those 5 games, 2 against Xavier, 1 against UNLV, 1 against Louisville, 1 against USC. Indiana would be 20-9. 20-9. At this point in the season, that's pretty good. 20-9 would be a lot better if Indiana could have closed out those games and played a more complete brand of baseball. But if I had 2 wheels, I'd be a bicycle. That's not the reality. The reality is that Indiana is in danger, I think, of wasting a loaded offense for the second year in a row. And I know that offense, I just talked about it, has been bad in the back half of games lately, but that's a 2-game sample size, right? I think the more concerning thing is the fact that against Louisville, a top 20 team in the eyes of most college baseball writers, Indiana committed 5 errors. And I know not all of those errors led to runs, but Indiana gave up 4 unearned runs in a game that was decided by 2 runs. Oof. You've got to avoid giving any team, but especially a good team like Louisville, extra chances. It always comes back to bite you. And it was just a horrible defensive performance for Indiana. It looked like the kind of performance you'd see out of a Little League team, throwing the ball around, making careless mistakes, and giving the opponent way too many extra chances. Any good team's going to capitalize on those, and that's what Louisville did. Louisville didn't play great. Indiana didn't play great, but Louisville played worse than Indiana until 2 outs in the 8th inning. All of those runs in the 8th inning, all 4 that Louisville scored, came with 2 outs, which also speaks to Indiana's pitching staff and the struggles it has with putting guys away. It seems like a lot of the trouble, and this is not unique to Indiana, it happens to teams all over the country, but a lot of the trouble Indiana pitchers run into happens with 2 outs because they just can't put guys away. So again, you would think that a lineup spearheaded by a pair of high-round MLB draft caliber talent would be better than 1 game above 500, but there's only so much that I guess 2 guys can do. But it's not just Taylor and Dickerson that are great either. It's Cooper Malamazian, a true freshman who's batting .340. It's Jake Hanley, a true freshman who's batting .385 through 29 games and is right now the runaway favorite to be named the Big Ten Freshman of the Year. It's Joey Brincheski as well, who has seen some more limited action this year, but he's still hitting over .300 in 25 games. Indiana has a ton of talent on the offensive side, and we talked about it before the year. The team would only go as far as the pitching and defense can carry it. And right now, it's showing, 5 errors against a top 20 team, blowing a 9-run lead in a rubber match against a conference opponent. These are things that good teams just don't do. Yes, Indiana has talent, but I think that talent is on the verge of going to waste. The series against Michigan State is huge. It's the final 3 games of this 16 home games in 19 overall games of this stretch that now has spanned about the better part of a month. You've got to take advantage of it. Indiana is facing one of the Big Ten's premier arms in Joseph Jirwa today at 1 o'clock. And if you win this game, you are set up very well to win the series. But Jirwa is going to make it anything but easy. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. If you want an Indiana Diamond sport that is not going to disappoint you, like Indiana baseball might, actually Indiana baseball does. I've now heard fans chattering about how they're not coming back to games and how disappointed they are, yada, yada, yada. For the last 2 games I've covered, which it oddly enough kind of felt like I was watching the same game happen twice, but if you don't want to watch the same game happen twice, I suggest following Indiana softball instead, because Shonda Stanton has been the model of consistency over the last handful of seasons. She's got her team winning 70% of the games they play. which by my rudimentary calculations is pretty good. They are 23-10. You remember, you think back to that hot start Indiana softball had, winning somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 games in a row. Indiana softball now 23-10, only 3-5 in the Big Ten, but they've got an opportunity this weekend, much like Indiana baseball, playing a series that begins today and concludes with a doubleheader tomorrow. The Maryland Terrapins come to town at Andy Moore Field, a Sunday night series opener on Big Ten Network, which, sure, you bet. Why not, right? So if you're looking for something to watch after the national championship on the women's side, flip it over to BTN. Indiana defeated Ohio State on the road on Monday, and Indiana's offense, one of the best in the nation, leading the country in doubles and on-base percentage, and second in the nation in team batting average. Again, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I think that's pretty good. So whereas Indiana baseball might be more known for its offensive futility, Indiana softball, no such issue. So that is going to be an exciting series against the Terps. Hopefully, for their sake, it's a bad day to be a Turtle. That series, again, getting underway 7 o'clock tonight, and then a doubleheader beginning bright and early, 10:30 on Monday, followed by the series finale somewhere around 1 o'clock, depending on when Game 1 comes to a close. This could be a very intriguing stretch for a lot of teams across the country when it comes to the diamond sports because of the weather. I think back to Indiana baseball, which we were talking about before the break, and you think about playing a lot of games in a short amount of time. It's very tough on teams' pitching staffs. And I think you might see more of an impact not this weekend, but next weekend, because Indiana and Michigan State and a ton of other teams impacted by the weather will be using their weekend arms a couple days at least off schedule. You think of teams that are fortunate enough to have 3 starters, which is kind of rare when it comes to college baseball. But you think of teams that have scheduled starters every weekend. Well, those guys might be used to pitching on Sunday in the early afternoon hours, now pitching on Monday, maybe noon, or Monday at 4. So you lose a rest day. And it'll be very important for all coaches, including Indiana's Jeff Mercer, to make sure that they manage their pitching staffs correctly. And on the flip side of that, let's say Indiana jumps on Michigan State starter Joseph Jerwa here in a couple hours. Jerwa is Michigan State's ace. He usually gives them at least 6 or 7 innings as a starter, which is very rare in college baseball. But if Jerwa gives Michigan State nothing, if Indiana hops on him, say, for 5 runs in the first inning and runs his pitch count up, that could set Michigan State back for the whole weekend. That said, though, even if that happens, Indiana did the same thing to USC in Game 1 of the doubleheader last weekend, and then went up by 9 runs and proceeded to blow it. So no lead is safe. But it's really important for teams, especially when the pitching staffs are off schedule, to make sure that they begin things soundly on the mound. Not that it's ever not important to begin things soundly on the mound. But for Michigan State, especially today, very important for Joseph Jerwa to give them the kind of start that he's been giving them all season long. I see no reason for that to change. But this Indiana lineup, certainly one of the most star-studded that he has faced this season. And we talked about how important this series is in the Big Ten. Michigan State is very similar in conference to Indiana, 4-5, whereas Indiana is 6-6. The Spartans are 7 games over 500 overall. Indiana just 1 game over 500 overall. But in the Big Ten, Indiana right around 8th, but just a game back of a top 4 seed in the Big Ten tournament, which kind of goes to show what happens when you expand your conference to, in the case of baseball, 17 teams. You have a bunch of gobbledygook, we'll call it gobbledygook, in the middle. And you have 1, 2, or maybe 3 teams at the top, Oregon, Iowa, UCLA right now. But by and large, there's a bunch of hodgepodge in the middle. And Indiana and Michigan State are right in the middle of that hodgepodge. Michigan State technically in 11th in the Big Ten, if we're going by tiebreakers. But the Spartans, say if they were to win 2 games against Indiana, would actually go a game ahead. Because they've played 1 fewer series so far than Indiana has in the Big Ten. But the Spartans would have more wins in fewer games, thus a higher winning percentage, thus leapfrogging Indiana and owning the tiebreaker. So that's why, again, every Big Ten series at this point in the year is extremely important. But it's critical for Indiana to take at least 2 out of 3 here at home. Because after this home stretch comes to a close, Indiana's schedule looks like this. You've got an average Illinois team, 3 games on the road in Champaign. And again, we're just talking conference games here. I'm not talking about the midweeks because those are obviously important, but do not bear as much on the postseason implications. So at Illinois, a home series against a very good Maryland team, and then 3 games at Iowa during Little 500 weekend, which as of right now, Iowa is one of the best teams in the Big Ten. Now, part of that is because the Hawkeyes really haven't played anybody good yet. I don't know how good Iowa is going to be in 3 weeks. Nobody does. But as of right now, there's a good chance that Iowa, which is one of Indiana's last resume-boosting opportunities on the schedule, Iowa's not actually that good anymore because they come back down to earth. I don't know whether or not that's going to stay true. But as far as Big Ten baseball is concerned, Iowa is, I would argue, the team to beat right now if it's not UCLA. And Indiana already lost 2 out of 3 to UCLA. Then you've got Purdue in Bloomington the second weekend in May. Indiana has a bye weekend. The first weekend in May, they go down to play Abilene Christian. But then you come home, you face Purdue. Purdue kind of in a similar spot right now to Iowa, where Purdue beat up on a bunch of cupcakes, and now the Boilers are crashing back down to earth. And then Indiana closes the regular season, as they tend to do right now, with a 3-game set against Michigan that is in Ann Arbor this year. So I mean, you look at that schedule and you think, okay, it's about a 50-50 split, and actually it is a 50-50 split. You've got 2 home series and 2 road series left after this week. Then you've got midweek games against Ball State, a pair, Indiana State, Evansville, and Cincinnati. Not a ton of needle movers there as far as RPI is concerned. You had your chances to boost your resume, and you couldn't do it. Now it's going to be about long-term consistency because you can't really make a splash with a couple of wins anymore. Indiana just 1 game above 500 right now. That's not going to cut it. As far as NCAA tournament selection is concerned, the Big Ten, a lot of people argue, myself included, is actually a weaker conference than the Sun Belt in baseball. So you're not going to have a ton of at-large bids. The Big Ten, I think, got 3 bids last year. It was Illinois, Nebraska getting the auto bid because the Huskers won the Big Ten tournament, and then Indiana as one of the last teams in the field. 3 teams in the Big Ten got bids last year. Oregon obviously made the dance. UCLA, I don't believe made it, but they're on track to make it this year. So you could now see it being 5. If Iowa holds serve, maybe 6. But it is tough for the Big Ten to get these bids because usually the conference is weak when it comes to baseball. And then the Big Ten does not ever make it far in the College World Series. At least it hasn't since 2019 when Michigan made the College World Series final and lost to Vanderbilt. So Indiana's going to need to start stacking wins. And again, we talked about it before, but you need to start stacking wins. You need to win every series from here on out. For my money, you need to win every series, and you need to win all of your midweeks at home, and ideally all of your midweeks across the board. You can go 2 out of 3 in every series and probably still make the dance, make the NCAA tournament, or at the very least, get a favorable seed in the Big Ten tournament and then make a run like you did last year. But as we said before, Indiana's running out of time to make that happen. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. Just heard sirens in Bloomington, which is a likely place for sirens to be, and I'm thinking maybe it's a fire truck that got lost on its way to Durham, North Carolina after what happened to Duke last night. A 14-point lead blown in the Final Four, which, wow, okay. That is the largest blown lead for Duke under head coach Jon Scheyer, and it is obviously probably the end of Cooper Flagg's college career. One electrifying year, in which he was named the Men's Player of the Year and will obviously be the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft. I almost said MLB draft. MLB draft doesn't matter as much in April. But as far as Cooper Flagg is concerned, I mean, it's got to be an incredible amount of pressure placed on the shoulders of an 18-year-old and 19-year-old kid. And for me, being older than 18 or 19, only by a couple years, but being older than that, seeing what these athletes are doing kind of makes you feel a little bit, I don't know, unproductive. Like, you see, whether it's Cooper Flagg or it's Liam McNeely or it's, we'll go into the Formula One world for a second. Kimi Antonelli is 18 years old. You think of Jackson Chourio in Milwaukee with the Brewers. All these athletes who are either around my age or younger than me. It's like, holy cow. It kind of puts things into perspective as to just how good they actually are. That they're able to do these things in their late teens and early 20s. It's absurd. It's absurd. And kind of makes you feel like you're not doing anything. But then you realize that actually, no, you are. It's just that these athletes are so insanely good. They are the top 0.1% of the top 1%. So big ups to Cooper Flagg. And obviously, the ACC was kind of a cupcake league this year. I think Kelvin Sampson, I don't know what Kelvin Sampson called it. It was something funny. I know that. He called it the Toy Poodle League. Said that Houston went 34-4 this year, not playing in the Toy Poodle League. So maybe Cooper Flagg benefited from playing in the Toy Poodle League, also known as the ACC. But still, taking your team to a Final Four as an 18-year-old, holy smokes, that is incredibly impressive. Especially when you consider on the other side, Auburn has a lot of guys on its roster who probably actually remember the Alamo, which of course is relevant because the Final Four being played in San Antonio. My guess is Auburn has some guys who were actually around back then. But the Tigers' season is over. And now Chad Baker-Mazara, at the age of 25 or 26 or 34, however old he is, may actually have to get a job, which, oh no, that's terrifying. Most 25-year-olds have to get jobs, but not if you play for Auburn men's basketball. So he and Janai Broome and all those guys who are 70 bajillion years old and eligible for retirement payments will now have to find greener pastures. Florida, Houston, on Monday night for the national championship. I, for one, I'm not even going to lie, I might not stay up because the NCAA likes to do this thing where it makes it extremely difficult for fans to actually care about the games because of how late they start. Maybe this is me just crying because I'm an Eastern time zone enthusiast, and I have been my entire life, and so is most of the country. But I think it's a little bit crazy that the national championship, they say it's scheduled for 8:50. Unless I'm mistaken, it's actually going to start somewhere around 9:30. I guess it's not even the worst because you think back to the Purdue-Houston game. That game didn't start until about 10:35 p.m. Eastern. That game was being played in Indianapolis between a team from West Lafayette and a team from Houston, Texas. From Houston, Texas. And it didn't begin until 10:30, and therefore it did not end until about 1 a.m. Eastern. And I had to then, host this show at 8 o'clock the next day. But you sacrifice a little bit of sleep when a game is as electric as that. What I don't like is how the NCAA decides to play the national championship on the men's side late on a Monday night. It has never made sense to me, and I know that with football you have to do it because you don't want to compete with the NFL. I get that. If you try to compete with the NFL, you will lose, and there is nothing that you can do to change that. But last I checked, there's no NFL football being played in early April. So why would you, and I don't know, maybe it's the women's Final Four starting on a Friday. Do you push it back to a Thursday so that the men's championship can be played on the weekend? I don't know. I think that would certainly be better than playing the men's national championship at 9:38 p.m. Eastern on a Monday. That might just be me, though. Maybe the NCAA has some sort of secret formula. It's like the Krabby Patty. You don't know how it works. You just know that it works, Eugene Krabs. But the women's national championship being played at 3 p.m. on a Sunday, hey, that makes sense. 3 p.m. on a Sunday, that's a great time slot for a national championship game that's being aired on ABC. That's great. It's going to be between two phenomenal teams, two phenomenal head coaches, Gino Auriemma for UConn and Dawn Staley for South Carolina. And I hope for South Carolina's sake that they win again, because then you can say that, oh, well, Indiana got knocked out of March Madness by the national champion for back-to-back years. You're okay with losing if it's losing to the champion, in my eyes. I did my fair share of losing when it came to sports in tournament settings, and I was always one to think, okay, well, if that team beat us, I want them to go win the whole thing. I don't want to lose at all, but if I do lose, I want to lose to the best, I guess. And maybe that's why I'm not playing sports anymore. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But Houston, Florida, two extremely different teams as far as their styles of play are concerned. I am stoked to see how Houston defensively matches up with Florida. Obviously, Florida coming out of the big, bad, seemingly invincible in the eyes of certain folks, ESPN, the big, bad SEC, and Houston coming out of the Big 12, which is a conference that ESPN also kind of cares about, just enough to keep it afloat, but not like the SEC, of course, because it just means more in the SEC. But Florida is a team that scores a lot. Houston is a team that doesn't score a lot. Houston is the number one defensive team in the country. I am a firm believer that no matter the sport, no matter the situation, whether it's pitching and defense in baseball or it's just defense in basketball or football, defense wins championships. I mean, you see it, obviously, completely different style of play, but in the NBA playoffs, defense actually matters. And I think you're going to see something similar on Monday night. I think it would be very cruelly ironic if Houston wins the national championship because, again, a lot of what Kelvin Sampson did at at Indiana is legal now that he's at Houston, and he served his time being banned from coaching college basketball. And I think it would be cruelly ironic if Houston wins the national championship under Kelvin Sampson, while Indiana has basically not been the same since Kelvin Sampson retired. And I say not been the same as in, well, okay, fine. 3 Sweet 16s since Kelvin Sampson walked away, because if he didn't walk away, he was going to get fired. Indiana, it would be nice to have someone like Kelvin Sampson coaching Indiana right now. I'm not going to lie, because a lot of what he did, like I said, is legal now. But again, we talked about it before. The only constant in the world of college athletics right now is that there are no rules. And Houston is well positioned to take advantage of Kelvin Sampson's coaching talents. And I would be pulling for him on Monday night if I were an Indiana fan. But again, I'm on the younger side. I don't actually remember. I was not a conscious being. I was alive, but I was not a conscious being when what happened to him happened at Indiana. What happened to him? What he did at Indiana, I was not conscious when he did that. I was 4 years old. So, I don't know. Maybe there are some Indiana fans who are split on this. I'd love to hear other people's opinions. But for my money, I hope that he and Houston can pull it off. Also because I just can't stand to see an SEC team win a national championship, because then we've got to hear about how big and bad the SEC is for an entire offseason. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Becker and IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you, and thinking about Indiana football. I don't know when I'm not thinking about Indiana football, I guess. But again, spring practice is well underway at this point. The spring game is actually not that far away, which, again, is kind of just a glorified practice, right? But darn it, it's IU football, and they'll be on the field, and it's free to watch, and I think that's cool. Thursday, April 17th, so in just over a week. Wow, goodness gracious, the end of the year is approaching faster than you can say. I don't know, you can say a lot. But it's approaching really fast, which means we're closer to football season, which is always good. And obviously Indiana losing a big asset at wide receiver already in Tyler Morris, non-contact knee injury already done for the season. Omar Cooper said it's tough. Tyler's a good player. He was going to do well in the slot position this year. It makes us, as in the rest of the wide receiver room, have to work harder, take more reps, and learn more about the offense to play inside and outside. Cooper said it sucks for Tyler and the whole group, obviously, but it helps the rest of them learn the slot and outside and be able to rotate and be more versatile. So I think that you'll see some other guys have to step up. Obviously, that's kind of the mentality regardless of the sport. Somebody goes down with an injury, right? Next man up. But Cooper also spoke very highly of Fernando Mendoza already, saying that Mendoza is starting to learn the offense really well and just seeing everything start to click. So he's starting to click with his receivers, and for the sake of all secondaries across the Big Ten, I think that's a very dangerous thing. Cooper says that Mendoza and Rourke are pretty similar as far as both being very good. Of course, I feel like Omar Cooper is going to say that regardless, but that's encouraging for someone with as much of a playmaking ability as Omar Cooper to say that. And I'm personally really excited about E.J. Williams coming back. One of the wide receivers who stayed after Tom Allen got fired did not stay healthy last year. And that was the thing that Curt Cignetti always said about him in the press conferences every Monday, was basically that, yeah, the best ability is availability. And right now, E.J. Williams just doesn't have that. Well, E.J. Williams, who entered the portal initially but then came back, said that he didn't even really want to go into the portal. And you think back to the fall when that happened, it was kind of just something where it seemed like there was something more at play than just, E.J. Williams doesn't want to be here anymore. Well, we know now, Williams said that he didn't want to go into the portal, but he said, quote, it was like a team rule that Coach Cignetti has, that guys that redshirt can't be part of the team. So I understood that. Williams, having been injured, I assume was going to take a redshirt and try to come back. Not entirely sure of the specifics there. But Williams said he wanted to do what was best for himself, so he decided to enter the portal. And then while he was on a visit at another school, Cignetti reached out, they had a good conversation, and Williams decided that he would return to Indiana. And then he continued talking about how the focal point this year is for him to stay healthy. Says that is the number one thing, being able to just be on the field. And then honing in on being versatile, learning different concepts, and run blocking as well. And that was one thing that Indiana's receivers were really good at last year. Obviously, I watched every game, save for the Northwestern game, from the top of a press box. But one of the things that stood out to me was how effective Indiana's receivers were when it came to run blocking. It's kind of an effort thing. It's kind of a buy-in thing. It's not flashy, and obviously wide receivers like making the flashy plays. We saw plenty of those last year too. But the run blocking for Indiana's receivers was very impressive. So for Williams to speak about that, I think is very important. He said that last year it was mixed emotions because he was part of that wide receiver room. But obviously it's got to be tough when you're not on the field making those plays with the guys that you train with all offseason long. I know what it's like. You work so hard and you can't play. You want to play so bad, but it just doesn't happen, whatever it is. And that's tough. It's very tough to do. But hopefully, for his sake, E.J. Williams can stay healthy this year. Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback for Indiana. Thinking about him and Pat Coogan, the Notre Dame transfer center, that might be one of the smarter center quarterback combos in the entire country. Mendoza coming over from Cal and Pat Coogan just coming down US 31 a little bit. Pretty smart. And Mendoza learning the offense, obviously it's not easy to learn a new system, but he welcomes change. And I think that's a good thing. Mendoza, being as smart as he is and being as talented as he is, I think is great for Indiana, because Curt Cignetti last year, and his assistants as well, obviously, did a great job of getting a lot from a little. A lot of performance from a lot of guys who weren't highly touted, weren't the most talented, and I don't say that as a knock on any of them, but it was obvious when Indiana went up against teams with so many NFL caliber players like Ohio State and Notre Dame and Michigan's defense as well. It was obvious that Indiana was the lesser talented team, but Indiana still found a way to beat Michigan. And that was an incredible game. That was encouraging that Cignetti was able to get so much out of so little. Now you've got some higher touted players, one of whom is Mendoza. Others, defensively, Lewis Moore coming back from Ole Miss. He was great when he was at IU the first time around, but held back a little bit by some extenuating circumstances. Fernando Mendoza coming over, 10th in the nation last year in passing yards per game, just over 273, even though he took the second most sacks in the country, 45. The only one who took more, Shedeur Sanders. But Mendoza, one of the higher touted transfers coming over. And for Indiana to land a player like him, I think speaks volumes about the future of this program and where it's headed. Cignetti made some waves after he signed his contract extension during the bye week before Ohio State, saying that we're in the emerging superpower of college football, why would I leave? And like most things he says, that got some laughs and some raised eyebrows from people across the country. But just back up for the big picture here. People are mad about IU football being good. People have been mad now for a few months about IU football being good. Has that ever happened? In my memory, no. Because 2020 IU was a feel-good story because we needed feel-good stories in 2020. And then the next year when fans returned, they crashed back down to earth about 5 minutes into the season opener. But Indiana football sustained success for the course of a full season. And now you've got people projecting them to finish next year 8-4 or 9-3, and people are mad about it. As in, Indiana fans are mad that, why are you only picking this team to win 8 games? Well, the schedule is a lot tougher, and although Cignetti talks about no self-imposed limitations, you look at Iowa, Oregon, Maryland, all on the road. Whew. Selfishly, as part of student media, I hope that I get to go to all of those games because those are all going to be electric, especially Autzen. I want to go to Eugene so bad. But as far as a strength of schedule goes, yes, that is way tougher than what Indiana played last year. But I think if Indiana fans are upset about the program being picked to go 8-4 in football, I think that that's actually a pretty okay thing to be upset about because it means you hold yourself to a high standard. It means you're doing what great teams do, and that is hold yourself to a very high standard. Expect perfection. You're never going to achieve perfection, but I think it's okay to expect to be perfect, to expect to go 12-0. Because who's to say that you can't, right? That's the way I look at it. Indiana playing a very weak non-conference schedule, again, doesn't help. Doesn't help. I'm going to be honest. Let's just shoot it straight. Kennesaw State is barely an FBS team. Indiana State was historically terrible last year. They were injured too, which didn't help. And then Old Dominion, whatever, right? Not great. So you'd like to see Indiana schedule better non-conference games in the future. We saw, I think it was either last week or this week, that Indiana's non-conference game with UConn is off the schedule. That was for 2026. The Huskies, I think, will instead play Miami of Ohio, if memory serves correctly. You'd like to see some better non-conference games. That was one of the qualms that people had with Curt Cignetti last year. Oh, you played Western Illinois and scored 77 points. Well, who were you supposed to play? Louisville. What people forgot to mention then was that it was not Cignetti that bought out of the Louisville deal. It was Tom Allen after Indiana completely collapsed and lost in one of the most inconceivable ways I've ever seen in person on a football field against Louisville at Lucas Oil Stadium in a game that was attended more by Louisville fans than Indiana fans. That was Tom Allen. That was not Cignetti. I think if Cignetti had been here and had the chance to make that decision, that he probably would have played Louisville and beaten Louisville too. That Louisville team that lost to something called 2024 Stanford football. So, yeah. Would you like to see Indiana schedule the big boys in the non-con? I would. Treat it like baseball. Schedule tough early. That way it helps you later. Because that is one of the concerns that I think a lot of people have is, oh, well, Indiana played on 2 huge stages last year. And the Ohio State game was particularly terrible. But again, Ohio State, a glorified NFL team that year, wearing college uniforms. Regardless, I'm just excited for Indiana football, and I think you should be too. I'm excited to cover them again next season and hopefully make it out to Eugene, Oregon, and make it back to Iowa City, and hope that my car holds up along the way, because driving all that way west to Iowa and to Nebraska, probably tough, but I don't have a plane that I can fly, at least not yet. But as Signetti says, no self-imposed limitations. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Record IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you, and I was talking before the break about going out to Iowa to see Indiana football. I should say cover Indiana football. And maybe, I don't know, flying to Eugene to go to Autzen Stadium, because Indiana plays out there next year too. Next fall. That's not even next year. That's in about 6 months. Actually, 6 months from Friday is when Indiana plays Oregon. So set your alarms now. But if you can't drive out there, maybe you could take a Greyhound bus or something. I don't know. Maybe Greyhound could sign me to an NIL deal and I could drive the bus to Iowa. I'm just throwing ideas out here. I'm throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. But I think it's very telling the way other teams in the Big Ten feel about Indiana football, that at least one team, I know Maryland made Indiana its homecoming, and I think Penn State may have as well. I don't know. It was either Penn State or it was Maryland. Or it was Iowa as well. Other teams are taking Indiana football seriously, which, again, when's the last time that happened? With fans in the stands. 2019 was a good year for Indiana football. I remember that. I was not under a rock. I remember that bucket game, double overtime, and then the subsequent putrid, awful, terrible, no good, very bad loss to Tennessee that followed, which I don't think we need to talk about anymore. God, what would have happened if Indiana won that game? Again, if I had wheels, I'd be a bicycle. If I had propellers, I'd be a helicopter. Neither of those things are true, so it didn't happen, but it's fun to think about sometimes. I hope that next season Indiana makes a bowl game and beats an SEC team. I think it would be really funny, because all the national media can talk about, especially ESPN, which unfortunately sets a lot of the agendas when it comes to college football. A lot of the messaging was about how big and bad the SEC was and how Indiana didn't deserve to be in the playoff, and Lane Kiffin was crying on Twitter about how Ole Miss deserved to be in. Oh, man. You should have beaten Florida. Florida wasn't even good last year. Yes, they were ravaged by injuries, but Florida was not good, and you lost to them because your quarterback forgot how to play football. Jackson Dart, who was the only quarterback in the country to have a higher a higher passer rating than Curtis Rourke. I hope Curtis Rourke gets a shot somewhere in the NFL. I know that he's not like an NFL starting caliber quarterback, right? I'd love to see him be like a journeyman backup or third stringer. Maybe he could be the Colts' new Sam Ehlinger, because Ehlinger is now a Denver Bronco. I was a Sam Ehlinger truther until I saw him play in a regular season game, and then I realized, oh, okay. Maybe Jason Bean is the answer, but that's neither here nor there. I'd like to see Curtis Rourke be a journeyman backup in the NFL, because Lord knows, you can make a decent amount of money holding a clipboard if you're doing it for an NFL team, and I think that would be pretty cool to see, provided, of course, that Rourke has a functioning knee after playing 13 games on a torn ACL, which, again, what an animal. What an animal. I've been fortunate enough, knock on wood, to never suffer a knee injury like that. But it could not have been very easy at all for him to do that. And yet he did it. And, he also came back after the thumb injury as well, where it was bad. It was a bad thumb injury. Had surgery on it, came back, and was still balling out. Put up 66 freaking points on Purdue. And I'm just reflecting on that game. I was on the field. I was shooting that game. And it's just, I've never seen Memorial Stadium look like a snow globe before. Look like, it was packed. It was a sold-out game. And by the third quarter, you couldn't feel your toes. But most of the fans stayed. And those who left because Indiana was winning by so much instead of losing by so much. I know that Purdue team was historically awful. I know that they only won one game and it was against an FCS team, yada, yada, yada. But that was cool. That was sick. And yeah, we were at Memorial Stadium till 12:30 a.m. on Sunday, wrapping up, doing post-game coverage. The pressers went forever. You could smell the cigars in the weight room as we were doing our interviews with the players. Elijah Surratt talked about how he wanted Waffle House in Bloomington. Mike Kadick said he was so happy he came back. Those are the kinds of things that I guess, Indiana football fans, it's the kind of stuff that you don't get to experience a lot. And I think you have to cherish it. And I guess that's one of the big reasons why I'm looking forward to football season so much, is just because you get those kinds of moments. And I think about, I shot 3 games last year. I shot Western Illinois, Washington, and Purdue. And for the Western Illinois game, yes, it's a Friday night game against a terrible team that hadn't won in 3 years, but there was basically nobody there by the end. I remember you could hear a lot of what was going on the field when you were on the field, which the difference between that game and then the Washington game, when Mikhail Kamara sacked Will Rogers, the Washington quarterback, when he sacked him on the first play from scrimmage, the place was so loud, it was deafening. And that was on a beautiful October day in Bloomington. There was not a cloud in the sky that day. And College Game Day was here, of course, and I saw Kirk Herbstreit's dog. I held a door for Kyle Schwarber. What in the world, man? You went from nothing, a bunch of naysayers, a bunch of skepticism, and then 2 months later, I'm covering that same team and I'm holding a door for Kyle Schwarber. And I look down the hall and I see Kirk Herbstreit's dog and I see Lee Corso wearing an Indiana sweater, thinking, holy smokes, this is cool. That's why you're looking forward to football season, because it is a magical time. And it helps when the team that you're covering is winning, because it makes it a lot easier to talk about them. Obviously, we talk about the good and the bad on this show. But just thinking about the good that is Indiana football, also trying to distract myself from Indiana baseball, probably wasting one of the most loaded offenses in the country, that, I guess, might be a coping mechanism for me. But it's a pretty good coping mechanism, because there is nothing like a good crowd pop at a football game. Basketball games are great. The atmosphere is great, unless you were in Bloomington this year, because the atmospheres usually weren't very good here. I think we only had one sellout, and that was the Purdue game, which I did not go to because I had called enough heartbreaking games, and I figured that might be another one. I was happy to be proven wrong. But the atmosphere at Memorial Stadium was incredible. The parking, not so much, but that's okay. I think you're willing to accept some of the growing pains. You've been listening to IU Sports Sunday.